Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be diving into another part of the playback engine here in Dorico. So in this video series I'm trying to demystify all the different parts that go into playback and using third-party instruments and other things to make your playback in Dorico that much better. Today we're going to be looking at one piece of that puzzle, which is expression maps. Now, expression maps in Dorico tell a software instrument what to do. Essentially, they're going to help Dorico understand that when this command happens, I should send this information to the MIDI instrument to cause a certain type of playback. Now, this could be something like mutes in a brass instrument. It could be the difference between pizzicato and arco strings. It could be as turning on a distortion unit on an electric guitar synthesizer, and a whole host of other things. These are really important for getting the most out of your playback in Dorico. So I want to walk you through the steps of how to utilize them here in Dorico to get the most out of your software instruments. So I have up a project here called Studio Time, and I want to just do a simple playback just so you can kind of hear what it sounds like right now. So you can hear this is a pretty dry recording. It sounds pretty good, but these instruments are a little lackluster. They're not really high end, and so we'd like to add a little more sparkle to this playback. So what we need to do is add some new instruments, and to utilize that instrument, we need to add an appropriate expression map. So here in Dorico, if we go under the library menu and we scroll down, you'll see this dialog for expression maps. The expression map menu might be quite large depending on how many different instruments you've installed in Dorico, but essentially you're going to be met with a list of how Dorico is going to interpret certain instruments. Now, because I have a lot of the Steinberg Halion instruments, I have a ton of expression maps in here, but we're also going to be creating our own for a custom instrument today. One of the things that's really important when we look at expression maps is understanding that what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a specific type of playing technique that would exist in the real world and assign it to some kind of sound set or playback technique in our instrument. For example, if I go to the Halion Sonic Orchestra for tuba, you can see it has programmed in a number of different playback techniques. We have this first one here called initial, which is actually just important for any type of instrument. This is the one that says, hey, this instrument exists and it needs to be used. It's basically there by default, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. The next one down here we have is called accent. Now, as you might imagine, this is what is triggered when we have an accent in the music. And you can see here that what it does is it has a key switch where it presses a virtual key on your MIDI keyboard to activate a certain sound sample in the instrument. You can also see there's one here for natural, meaning this is kind of normal sound, just use it as it is. And we also have this one here for staccato. Again, this one is activated by a key switch, and so it will push that virtual key on your keyboard and it will activate that sound. Now, as we go through, I'm going to explain some of the other parts of this menu, but I at least wanted to give you kind of a concept of why we're doing this and what the purpose is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to my Play tab, and I'm going to choose an instrument that I would like to reassign. In this case, I'm going to reassign the B-flat trumpet to a different instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that instrument in the play window here. Then I'm going to go under VST and MIDI. In this dialog, this is where we can add new instruments to the project. And you can see I have a number of different instruments already assigned in the project, but we want to go ahead and add another one. So we're going to scroll down and click on this plus sign here, and it will pop up with a new blank instrument. From here, I'm going to click on the drop down, and you can see I'm met with a list of the different instruments I have installed on my computer. And I'm going to go down, and in this case, I'm going to use Native Instruments, and I'm going to use Contact Player 8, because that is the player that's going to load the sound sample that I want to use for this project. So if you don't see the name of your sound sample, you might have to think what player loads that sound sample. Okay, once it finishes loading the player, I can go ahead and I can hit this little E key here, and this is going to launch the instrument window. And this is where we're going to load up the sound samples into the instrument so we can use them for playback. When I click on the E, you can see I'm met with this nice window here that gives me all the different instruments that I can load in my contact player. And you can see I have a number of different ones: Atomic Big Band, Vintage Big Band, as well as this one called Session Horns, which I really do like quite a bit. Okay, now that I have the instrument loaded into the player, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign my trumpet part to this player. Now, most instruments will load with what they call an omni input, which means it'll take MIDI input from any channel on this bank. And so you don't generally have to tell it that you're going to be on channel 1 or channel 2 unless you're doing something a little more complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my Play tab, and I'm going to go to my Track Inspector, and then I'm going to choose from my list here the Contact Player, which is where I loaded in that Pro horn. You can see it loaded a default expression map, and if I go ahead and hit a MIDI key, you can hear it plays back the instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my E key here again to load the instrument. And a lot of these instruments currently have a really nice touch, which is they'll actually load up some kind of menu that will show you the different key switches, aka the different kinds of sounds we can load. You can see we have non-vibrato, vibrato, we have this forte piano crescendo that's built automatically into the sound, grace notes with vibrato, growling, staccatos, rips, and then it also has this empty one here that I could assign. And you can see these are actually drop-down menus, and there's a whole host of things I can do, like the brass shake. So now that I have that selected, you can hear if I hit any note on the MIDI keyboard, what it's going to do is activate not only the note, but that technique. And if I want to do rips, I could go ahead and highlight that. Here is my staccato. And here's my forte piano crescendo. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to like, why do I want all these different techniques? But these sampled sounds are going to be more realistic in playback than having Dorico try to interpret just your standard sound as a staccato, marcato, or any of these other techniques. So these can be really handy to upping kind of the overall sound quality of your instrument. Now, the reason that we needed to load the instrument first is because we really wanted to see which key switches are available so we can build the expression map so Dorico knows what to do when it encounters certain kinds of articulations in the music. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back over to our expression map editor, and we're going to kind of use these two in conjunction so we can not only add some realistic playback, but we can also tweak how Dorico interprets this instrument. So heading back over into Dorico, we're going to go to the Library tab, and we're going to go back to the expression map. Now, we saw as our example before that we have this listing that is created when we create an expression map, and essentially, in a basic instrument like this Pro Horns, we're essentially going to assign a key switch to each of these different playing techniques so that Dorico can load them whenever we want them. So what we're going to do is come down here to this plus sign, and we're going to add a new expression map. Now, normally you're not going to see this top area in your expression map. And I will admit, with the exception of creating a new one or changing a name, you really don't want to mess around with these settings on top here. These are very software specific, and you could really break your expression map if you're to go up and try and change too much of this stuff. So if you're not 100% sure what this stuff means, I would recommend maybe leaving this part alone. So the first part is we're going to give this a name, and we're going to call this Pro Horns. And I'm going to put in this category of new because I've already created some expression maps for this instrument in the past. Now, because I can customize the key switches of this instrument, you may end up actually creating more than one expression map for this instrument, because you may want to, on one song, use a certain set of techniques, and then on a different song, use a different set of techniques. From here, you have the option to allow multiple notes on the same pitch, which for some instruments that is nice, but in this case, we don't need that. And then you also have this stage template settings. If you use a stage template for things like panning and whatnot, it will apply to this instrument. Now, not all instruments will take this into consideration when you're using it, so this may or may not work depending on your instrument. The last one that I do think that you want to check out is this pitch bend range. Right now it's set to 2, which is a whole step, but if you would like it to have a larger glissando range, you could go ahead and put that out to, say, 12, which would be a full octave. Okay, now that I'm done with this top section, I can go ahead and I can start working on this bass and add-on switches. This is the most important part of this process, because this is going to tell the instrument what it does. Now, again, this first section here, this initial, you don't really need to mess with. It's a part of all of these expression maps, and it's kind of a default, so I'd just leave it in place the way it is. There is one important element, though, in this first setting, which is this middle C note. What this does is it tells Dorico where the instrument thinks MIDI C is on a keyboard. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but not all MIDI instruments assign middle C to C4. Sometimes they assign it to C3 or C5, depending on how the instrument works. And the way you can verify this is to go back to your instrument, and you can see here that for me, middle C is actually C3 on this instrument, because here's C0 on the bottom, here's C7, and there's C3 right in the middle. So this is really more of a C3 instrument than a C4. Now, this is not something that is set in stone and you can never change it again. So if you set it to something and it starts misbehaving, you could always try another one of those settings and it might be the solution. So if your key switches aren't working properly, that might be the solution. So back here in my Pro Horns, I'm going to click on my new, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to set this to a C3 instrument, and then I'm going to come down here to my natural. Now again, natural, this key switch is the baseline for my instrument. What do I want it to utilize when it's just playing standard notes, no articulation, no nothing? For some instruments, you can just leave this blank, but in this particular case, we actually have a setting we want to set. So this is where sometimes I find shrinking your screen down a little bit can be really helpful. What I've done here is I've shrunk my Dorico window down a little bit so I can make room so that I can see my instrument window at the same time, so I can actually see what the key switches are. So while I'm in the play tab, I'll hit my little E, and then I'm going to drag my instrument over here so I can see those key switches. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back over to my library tab in Dorico. I'm going to open up my expression map, and now you can see I can see both the instrument key switches as well as my expression window, so I can kind of go back and forth. So you can see over here in my key switches, negative C1 is set to non-vibrato, which is just standard notes in the instrument. So that's what we want to set to our natural sound in Dorico. So what we're going to do here is we're going to highlight the natural, and you can see we have a set of buttons down here. And the one we want to add is a key switch, and this is going to allow us to set that natural. So we're going to go ahead and activate that, and it gives us 3 options. The first one is that it is a key switch. We already knew that. 2, it asks us which MIDI note we're going to send in, which in this case is going to be negative C1. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and type in C negative 1, and then now it knows that when it sees the natural, which is just, again, normal playback, it will do C1, and that will set the instrument to that area. Now, as I said before, there's a couple of other things I want to point out in this instrument and in this window, because this will affect your playback. Now, the first thing you have up here is you have this transpose, delay, apply to, and all these other things here. These are settings that if you have a really specific instrument that does very specific things, like let's say, for example, your instrument has a delay because it has to do some processing on the back end, you could actually set a delay so that it will actually line back up with the timing of your music. And you can also set a transposition, because some MIDI instruments like basses and guitars actually put the notes around middle C, which in reality they should be way on the bottom of their keyboard. And in that case, it actually gives you the proper playback without having to alter your notation. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive, but it's just the way that some of these instruments are designed. The one that I do want to change, though, is down here under Volume Dynamic. Now, on some MIDI instruments, say drum sets, they do volume specifically with key velocity. Because let's face it, in the real world, if you took a drum set and you hit a drum, the harder you hit it, the louder it is. And that's basically the way velocity works in MIDI. The harder you hit an object, the louder it is. But on an instrument like a wind instrument, you can play with really hard articulation, but play very softly, which is, in essence, you can have a really high velocity, but a very low volume, which is why we want to change it over to this controller. And the normal volume controller for most instruments is actually 11. So we're going to change that to control change 11. The other thing we would like to do, though, is I like to set on this, use secondary dynamic. And what this does is it says, hey, when I'm playing loud, not only do I want to use a loud volume, but I also want to use a high note velocity. So I get the sound of like really hard articulations and loud volume. So that's a nice touch on a lot of these, especially like wind instruments. Now that we have set up this playing technique, we can go back and we can kind of duplicate this process for many of the other sound sets here in Dorico. So you can see we have our vibrato sound, we have grace notes, growling, staccato, rips, and a few of these other things. So let's go ahead and do this one here for the brass shake. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another playback technique. So I'm going to hit this plus sign down here. Now it's going to pop up with this dialog for playback techniques. Now this list are things that Dorico associates with specific types of performance practices. You can see things like mouth open, motor on, muted, and there's a very large list here, but you will see there's one for shake, which is what we want, right? We want to add a shake to a note so that it will play the shake command in our instrument. So once we've added this new state here, we're going to go ahead and add our key switch, and that we need to set to G sharp -1, which is our key switch over here in our instrument. And we need to set these settings the same. We want our volume as our controller 11, and we're going to use note velocity for our secondary. So let's go ahead and add just a couple of other key switches so I can show you how this works. So the second one I want to show you is this one for vibrato. So if you wanted it to play with vibrato, we can go ahead and we can add another one, and we can type in vibrato, hit OK, add our key switch, which in this case is C sharp -1. Again, I'm going to set my dynamics there. And then finally, let's go ahead and add the staccato feature, which is F sharp -1. Okay, so now you can see at this point we have our natural, our shake sound, our staccato, and our vibrato. Now you could do this for every single playing technique in the instrument and more, but at least this is a place to get started with this, so that as you're building your instrument, you can access these playback techniques. To be clear, when you're working through this, your instrument might be a little different than this instrument, and you might have access to a larger host of playback techniques. If you were to click on the Note Performer one, that list is huge because it has such a huge array of playback techniques that it can cover in Dorico. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK to save all of this. Okay, now that we've saved our expression map, the most important thing we need to do is we actually need to assign that expression map to the instrument. So over here in our routing, we're going to go down to our expression map dialog here, and we're under our trumpet, which is what we set. We're going to go down here to Pro Horns and this one called Pro Horns New, and we're going to go ahead and click on that. Now that will load this expression map into this instrument so that as Dorico interprets the playback, it will utilize these techniques. Now that I have the expression map set, I'm going to come back over here to my score and I'm going to add in some of these techniques. So the first one I'm going to add in is a shake. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the note I want and I'm going to hit Shift-O for ornaments, and then I'm going to type in the word shake, which will activate this command. And you can see it adds this little indication on the top of the note, and you can hear if I click on it, it plays the shake. And if I highlight this little segment and hit play, did you notice down here in my instrument window, it actually highlighted the key switch as it was activating it. Okay, we can also set playback techniques like vibrato. So let's say we wanted to have vibrato for these notes. So if I highlight them, I can come down into my playing techniques, and I can click on vibrato, and you can see it assigns it for that length. Now you can verify whether or not these are working by clicking on your inspector on the bottom. And if you go over here to the piano roll, you will see it's actually notifying me which key switches are being activated. So you can see here it says it's using shake because we've activated the shake command. Goes back to natural when it doesn't. There's our vibrato command. And if I activate the playback for this section, you'll hear. So this is a quick introduction to using expression maps here in Dorico. Now, again, this is specific between your instruments, so no one technique is going to work for every single instrument in Dorico, so you're going to have to go in and do a little bit of research on how your specific instrument works. If you're looking for some help with this, you're welcome to send me a message through my website, larsenjazz.com, and I'm happy to help you walk through the process. It can be a little bit daunting, but it's not too bad, I promise. So thanks so much for watching, and hopefully you'll enjoying the video and you'll think about subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to get up to 50,000 subscribers here in 2026. The channel's been growing great, and I'm really enjoying making this content for you. So thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the rest of these video series on playback in Dorico.